Thanks, Convener. Again, just to confirm that committee are happy to agree the recommendations in the report.
Oh, sorry, I keep on. Right, okay, right. That's agreed, yes.
Thank you. That then takes you to 5.3, which is a presentation on the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region Bus Partnership Fund, and we have Neil Martin to present.
Okay, Neil, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon all. Let me just share my screen. There we go. Yeah, hi all. Neil Martin, Project Manager for the Edinburgh Corridors BPF project. Members will be aware last summer the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal secured £3 million to progress strategic and outline business cases for bus priority improvements in the region. And that was circa 1.4 million. We also secured an additional 1.4 million to implement quick win bus priority measures. So that's making permanent the measures that were introduced during COVID through the Bus Rapid Deployment Fund. And that's a similar amount, 1.45 million. So this slide pack really is just an update on kind of current progress and when we envisage coming back to the Joint Committee with various outputs. So just to line yourselves up for that. In terms of kind of why we're here and what we're looking to achieve, I've included the kind of BPF fund criteria below, but in a kind of nutshell, the project's focus is to assess options for implementation of bus priority infrastructure to improve bus journey times, to hopefully facilitate modal shift away from the private car. So a big challenge, but it has to start somewhere. In terms of the geographic study of the strategic business case, it covers 7 key corridors in the region and 2 orbital routes on the outskirts of Edinburgh. So you've got the Orbital South and Orbital North. In terms of the business case itself, that's been led by Jacobs, and we're making good progress with the current plan. Hopefully in 2 weeks' time, so 16th of September, we will be completing the case for change. So that's a key kind of component of the strategic business case. The business case itself, we're currently doing a lot of stakeholder engagement with bus operators and wider stakeholders. And the current plan is hopefully to have a kind of final version of that in January next year, with a view to bringing the outputs of that study to the Joint Committee in March for feedback. In terms of the early work so far, so there's been a lot of analysis trying to understand the current picture in terms of post-pandemic movements on our roads, because obviously a lot has changed. So this is just to demonstrate some of the early analysis. So the red spots on this diagram kind of highlight areas of high congestion, and the amber are kind of areas of moderate congestion. So you'll see in the morning, you've got higher congestion around the kind of perimeter of the city, still with congestion in the city itself, but maybe not as pronounced as on the outskirts. And similarly, in the kind of PM peak, it's a bit more of a mixed bag actually. So you've got you still got areas of kind of really high congestion on the kind of outskirts, but you also see kind of areas of high congestion in the city centre from a bus perspective. So that's just to give you a flavour of some of the initial analysis work we've been doing. So that's the strategic business case kind of work stream. The other kind of big work stream, and it is quite a big one, is the quick wins work stream. So that what the quick wins is doing is taking the measures implemented through the, I always get this wrong, Bus Priority Rapid Deployment Fund introduced in COVID and making them permanent. So what that's really doing is, in essence, for the vast majority of the schemes, is making bus lanes permanent. So you've got bus lanes in at the moment, but they're there on a kind of temporary basis, but it's making them permanent. And then for some of the schemes, we are reconfiguring traffic signals to improve bus journey times. So in terms of the geographic spread of those schemes, we've got 4 schemes in East Lothian. We've got 1 scheme in Mid Lothian. However, the scheme in Mid Lothian, we are forecasting an underspend. So we've recently identified further schemes which we're looking to kind of get approval on so we can utilise the full budget allocation. And then we've got 6 schemes on the kind of outskirts of Edinburgh, which we're progressing. So we're making good progress on it, but there's a lot to it. But we will get there. The next slide just sets out the kind of process we're taking this through. So you'll know that the BPRDF schemes were introduced under temporary traffic regulation orders, and they have a lifespan of 18 months. So what we decided to do a while back is to convert them to experimental traffic regulation orders, which also have a lifespan of 18 months, but we've chosen to have them under ETRO for 6 months, for the ones in Edinburgh anyway. And what that allows us to do is just gives us a bit more time to gather further evidence, focus on options development. So, how do we make the bus lane permanent, and how do we do it in the most efficient way possible? And probably most importantly, it allows for another 6 months of consultation with the public. So we will go through that 6-month period before applying for the permanent traffic regulation order. As you'll have seen with the strategic business case slide, which kind of demonstrated the geographic scope, there is a huge amount going on in the bus priority world, with projects kind of active in each of the majority of local authorities in the region. So it's just really to give you comfort that we are interacting with all other BPF projects, and there's a number of ways we do that. So we have a monthly Bps Forum, which is chaired by Sestrans, and that's attended by all BPF project managers and appraisal leads across the region. So that's been a really, really helpful forum where we share lessons, and then also just probably more importantly, just make sure we're aligned in terms of who's doing what geographically. And in my next slide, I'll come on to it as well. But we've also initiated an Edinburgh Bus Alliance, which takes place monthly, and is attended by all the local authorities in the region. In terms of that Edinburgh Bus Alliance, so that's been set up with the kind of key objective to work towards a formalised bus service improvement partnership and partnership plan. I will say that legislation isn't kind of live as yet, but that will be coming in at some point next year. So what we're looking to do, use the Edinburgh Bus Alliance to do, is it's a forum for all the local authorities to come together, the bus operators, Transport Scotland, Sestran, Bus User Scotland, and also actually Transport Scotland, to work towards that bus service improvement partnership. And the bullets below kind of set out our kind of initial terms of reference, but broadly our key aims are to bring patronage back to pre-pandemic levels. Now we can't put a kind of timeline on that, but that's one key goal. The other key goal is to try and reduce bus journey times to make it a more attractive proposition to facilitate modal shift, and to keep improving the bus services in the region. Final slide is just a summary of the kind of key programme milestones. So as I said earlier, strategic business case, we're looking to have that finalised early next year, with a view to taking it back to yourselves and the Joint Committee in March for review and feedback. Beyond that, we will then move on to the outline business cases. So we've got 3 outline business cases to do, and it's quite a very tight programme, but we are aiming for August next year for completion on that. So we would aim to take the outputs of that back to yourselves in the Joint Committee in September, October, whenever the meeting scheduled around that time. In terms of the quick wins, so the quick wins are kind of on the periphery of the city. We're looking to complete them kind of May 2023. Some will go finish earlier than that, but May 23 is the date where they'll all be complete. East Lothian quick win schemes, so that the 4 schemes that we've got going there, kind of forecasted completion for them at the moment is March next year. And Mid Lothian, it'll be dependent on if we're able to allocate the funding to some of the new schemes that we've identified. But in terms of the existing scheme, we plan to have that complete February next year. And I'll stop there. So that's the end of the presentation. So I'll pause there to take any questions.
Right, thanks very much indeed, Neil. Could I just maybe a couple of questions just before I'll open it up to others. In terms of the bus priority, when you put them in the temporary measures, you know, has there been any where you went, you know what, that didn't work as well as we thought? It might have been better if we had put it somewhere else. And I say that genuinely because we all think we're right until reality kicks in. So that's the first question. And the second question is with regard to any underspend. Have you ever thought about bus priority traffic lights? In other words, the traffic lights change so the bus continues to go on. In terms of, and I'm thinking like yourself, the more attractive we can make it for passenger journeys, the better it is. And hopefully, he says, fingers crossed, we can get people back onto the buses again, because although they're going back, they're not going back in the numbers that we would all like and hope. So I was just wondering if that was in your thinking, or it could be a further project depending on if there's any more funding ever comes to fruition. Thanks for that.
I can answer that question. So in Mid Lothian, so we have a quick win scheme at Hillhead Junction. So that is a scheme where there's been quite a bit of debate at the moment in terms of whether that scheme will definitely benefit bus priority. So what we're doing is we've commissioned UNEX to do a traffic count, which I think they completed this week. So we're just waiting to see the kind of outputs of that study. So that's probably a good example of one we're not 100% sure about, but we're going to get the evidence to give us a view of whether we should progress with it or whether we should look elsewhere. Your second question on, can we bolt things on to traffic signals? Again, in Mid Lothian, had conversations last week where, in Mid Lothian, you've got the kind of capital programme to upgrade the traffic signals. What we're looking to do is we've identified, I think, 4 or 5 junctions where we could easily, 4 or 5 junctions that are going through your kind of capital traffic signalisation programme. We could bolt on a kind of bus priority, I don't know technically, a bus priority light to that signal. So that's something we're investigating to try and make sure we make full use of the funding.
Well, thanks for that, Neil. And the question coming from a Mid Lothian elected member wasn't done with me knowing the answer, but thanks very much for that. We'll just call it a bit of kit that you bolt on. That's the easiest way. Never mind the techie. Never mind the techie.
Yeah.
Right, could I open up for members? Oh, Councillor McMillan.
Apologies, Chair, but I'm enjoying this and I'm new to it. And Neil, that was really interesting. Just a couple of reactions as somebody who is new to it. In your first slide, there were sort of like major park and ride places. And I had wondered if you were going to tell us that there were more. And I guess that's not an easy win. But in terms of your thinking and in terms of modal shift, in the long term, would you be looking at more of those kind of, speaking from East Lothian, the Walliford, the Sheriff Hall types of park and ride? And how much, when you look for an easy win, do you look at the impact that, you know, it's easy to do, but it also has a big impact? How much of that is in your thinking?
Yeah, so on the park and ride question, so that's definitely within the scope of the strategic business case. So we've asked Jacobs to look at all kind of measures, that park and ride is one of them, because I think,
thank you,
if you can make it work, I think it's an excellent measure. There are challenges with it.
No, absolutely.
The second question, I'm not sure I quite got the second question.
I have a model in my head that I used to use as a consultant, which was that if you were looking at options, was it easy? You know, so a quick win was often easy, but also, you know, it could have a high impact and be easy. So that was like your low-hanging fruit. So it was just in your thinking and recommendations. I suppose my follow-up would be, which of the possible options were rejected because they weren't quick wins? So there's something about that for the future, I reckon.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's a bit of a steer we've had from Transport Scotland. So when we put the bids in, I think the steer was be very bold and be ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
I think it started to get a bit more, do your strategic business case, do your OBC, but we want stuff in the ground. So I think, based on that steer, we will be trying to find the kind of low-hanging fruit that's not been picked up as part of the quick wins, if that makes sense.
Thanks. And I'm reluctant to say this because I know Audit Scotland are possibly looking in as observers, but, you know, there is always that rush to spend before the end of the year, which is often not the best value for money. But I'll share my experience on that another time. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, you couldn't hold back, could you?
You know me, Chair. I wasn't going to let him get off the hook without saying something, but just to augment what Neil was saying, and I get exactly what Councillor McMillan's highlighting here, and it's a good point. I think there's two main bodies here, and it's recognising that, you know, that sort of Green Book journey, which you referenced before, and that stag appraisal takes a number of years to go through that whole journey. And we've just came out of a pandemic, and with that, you know, because we had sort of a previous fund, the Bus Priority Rapid Deployment Fund, that we trialled measures in a pandemic setting. And some of these measures, what we're doing now is saying, look, do they have sort of a real world context to them? And, you know, Neil's just highlighted there that we're doing extra counts in certain locations, because you'll see now that the traffic's really ramping up, and, you know, thinking in some places around 85%, and then, you know, the traditional peaks are gone and things like that. So what worked well in the pandemic might not work well in the, you know, in the real world. So that's why we're going out to do extra, and that's what we're terming up sort of quick wins, because we've already actually got these measures in, and it's the retention of those measures. But we are looking, and maybe, Chair, it's going back to one of your questions at the start around, you know, have we got this right, you know, or did we kind of say, oh, some of these are wrong? That's what we're kind of trying to validate now, and that's why we're doing the ETROs to do it. Now, there is some stuff there that they worked well in the pandemic, but also they need maybe tweak slightly to operate more and be optimised for the real world setting. So for example, in the A90 corridor, it's heavily reliant on an aging queue management system that's traffic signals based. If you're familiar with the Q90, and it's all around bus priority, it's about 20 years old. So we went back to Transport Scotland and said, actually, as part of this quick wins work, there's a bit more of an expensive scheme here, but we could push it through quite quickly. And traffic signal technology has moved on a lot in 20 years, so it's kind of off-the-shelf stuff, whereas before, 20 years ago it was very bespoke and very expensive, but we can actually get a solution in the real-world setting that's relatively cheap and is a quick win, rather than putting it through the whole business case journey that we'll probably see in 3 or 4 years' time implementing. So there's a bit of a blend, but there is two distinct bodies of work, and that's the stuff that we had in the pandemic. How do we optimise that, tweak it and retain it? Where it shows benefit, and we've got all the evidence and collecting even more data to back some of that evaluation up. And then the second part of it is that medium to longer term measures, which are going to be subject to the whole business case journey. But we'll keep the committee updated to this, and you know, Neil's provided an interim update, but I think there's some couple of big milestones on the horizon. You know, that Case for Change report's about to be published, so once that information comes out, hopefully some of this stuff will become a bit clearer.
No, thanks very much for that, and thanks for that clarity, because it is about bus experience. If you're a passenger, you're using a journey to, for whatever reason, you want a simple A to B. You don't want to have this, oh, we're moving, oh, we're not moving. So, you know, I totally endorse, and we've been trying it for years. The flipping pandemic's come along, and we're now actually starting all over again practically. But as you say, Jamie, the one thing that we're really seeing is the amount of vehicles that are now back on our networks. It's just phenomenal. In fact, actually, in a way, what I'm really worried about is more people have gone back in to using their own vehicles rather than using bus. So we've got another challenge on the horizon. Well, actually, it's not on the horizon. It's right here and now to actually get these folks back out of their cars and back onto the buses that they were using pre-pandemic. And, you know, it's really going to be a challenge. But with improved measures comes with improved opportunities, and that's what we've got to believe in. Anyway, sorry for my bus rant. Right, there's no more questions, so we're endorsing that report, and we look forward to you coming back with an update and a big positive agenda in going forward. So thanks very much for that.